Imagine a man who speaks the truth to people for over 40 years and is hated for it. A man betrayed by his own people, rejected by his hometown, with his closest friends plotting to kill him. A man who wakes up every morning with a heartbreaking pain and every morning opens his mouth again to speak. This man's name is Jeremiah. And today, I want to tell you his story, not just as an ancient biblical tale, but as a story of how the resilience of the human spirit is truly forged. Because Jeremiah is perhaps the most relatable, deeply human prophet in the entire Bible. He isn't a bronze hero or an unshakable giant of faith. He weeps, he doubts, he complains to God. He even curses the day he was born. And that is precisely why his story speaks so powerfully to us today. Because resilience isn't the absence of pain. It is the ability to keep going despite the pain. Jeremiah's story begins with him not wanting to become a prophet. When God called him, he tried to refuse. Here are his first words, sounding so human, so familiar to every one of us. "Ah, sovereign Lord, I do not know how to speak. I am too young." Jeremiah was born in Anathoth, a small town a few miles outside Jerusalem, into a family of priests. His calling came in his youth, and the first thing he felt wasn't excitement, but fear. He looked at himself and saw only his own inadequacy. And here is what matters. God doesn't dismiss his fear. He doesn't say, "No, you're a great speaker." Instead, he gives something entirely different, the promise of his presence. Do not say, "I am too young." You must go to everyone I send you to and say whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to rescue you. And then came a gesture that in the ancient world symbolized the transfer of authority and power. Then the Lord reached out his hand and touched my mouth. In that very moment, Jeremiah receives not eloquence, but the word itself. And right here is the first lesson of resilience. It is born not from self-confidence, but from surrender. When a person, despite all their fear, says yes to something greater than themselves. Jeremiah didn't become a prophet because he felt ready. He became a prophet because he trusted the one who called him. Now, let's look at what God actually commanded Jeremiah to say. Because right here lies the root of all his suffering. Jeremiah lived at a turning point in history. The kingdom of Judah was teetering on the edge of an abyss. From the north, the mighty Babylonian Empire was advancing, and all of Jerusalem's calculations came down to one single question: how to survive. Kings formed alliances with Egypt, relying on military might and diplomatic maneuvering. And at this exact moment, God gives Jeremiah a message that shatters all their plans. A message simple and devastating. Do not resist Babylon. Surrender. Because the fall of Jerusalem is no historical accident, but God's judgment for the sins of the people. Imagine how that sounded to his contemporaries. Their prophet, a man called to encourage the nation, is calling for surrender to the enemy. It sounded not just like cowardice. It sounded like treason. Jeremiah was branded a traitor, an enemy of the people, an agitator. Other prophets, those he called false prophets, preached the exact opposite. Peace, peace. There will be no war. God will protect his city. The people listened to them because their words were pleasant. But Jeremiah's words were bitter as wormwood. And here lies the second lesson of resilience, perhaps the hardest one of all. Resilience is the ability to speak the truth when no one wants to hear it. It is the ability to stand against the whole world, not because you are righteous in your own eyes, but because truth is more precious than the approval of the crowd. Jeremiah could have stayed silent, compromised, told them what they wanted to hear, and he would have become a national hero. But he chose otherwise, and that choice cost him everything. Now comes the most painful part of Jeremiah's story, and perhaps the most important for each of us. Jeremiah was utterly alone. God commanded him not to marry or have children, because children born in that era were doomed to perish. Imagine that level of isolation. a man forbidden even from starting a family of his own, because his entire life was poured into a ministry that brought nothing but heartbreak. He was betrayed by those closest to him. Even your own brothers and the family of your father, even they have betrayed you, God tells Jeremiah. The people of his hometown, Anathoth, plotted to kill him. The priests and prophets of Jerusalem demanded his execution. The king burned the scrolls he had dictated. And in this crushing loneliness, Jeremiah penned words that became some of the most honest in the entire Bible. They are known as the Confessions of Jeremiah, and they are, at their core, the cry of a soul pushed past its breaking point. He says to God, "You deceived me, Lord, and I was deceived. You overpowered me and prevailed. I am ridiculed all day long, everyone mocks me." And then, the most piercing cry, "Cursed be the day I was born. Why did I ever come out of the womb to see trouble and sorrow?" Think about that. This is a prophet of God speaking, the man God chose. And he doesn't hide his despair. He doesn't pretend everything is fine. He pours out all his bitterness, all his pain, all his desolation before God. And right here is the third, and perhaps most vital lesson. Resilience is not the absence of despair. It is the ability to bring your despair to God rather than running away from Him. Jeremiah doubts, laments, and even accuses, but he never walks away. Even in his darkest moments, he keeps the conversation going, and that is what separates him from those who break. And this raises a natural question. What actually kept him going? What gave him the strength to continue when everything inside screamed, "Stop"? Jeremiah's answer is strikingly honest. He tried to stop. He really did. Here are his own words. "I said, I will not mention his word or speak any more in his name. But his word was in my heart like a fire shut up in my bones. I was weary of holding it in. Indeed, I could not." There it is. That is the secret of Jeremiah's resilience. Not willpower, not a heroic persona, not stubbornness, but fire. The word of God burning inside him so intensely that he physically could not hold it back. This is crucial to understand, because we often picture resilient people as those who simply grit their teeth and push forward purely on sheer grit. But Jeremiah shows us another way. His strength didn't come from within himself. It came from what was burning inside him. He wasn't the source of the fire, he was its bearer. And that is good news for every one of us. Because if resilience depended solely on our own willpower, most of us would have broken long ago. But Jeremiah testifies, when something greater than you burns within you, you can endure what far exceeds your own strength. And now comes the most dramatic part of the story, because everything Jeremiah prophesied came true. In 586 BC, the Babylonian army conquered Jerusalem. The temple built by Solomon, the pride of the nation, the very symbol of God's presence, was destroyed. The city lay in ruins, the king was captured, and most of the population was driven into Babylonian exile. And right here, something happens that completely overturns our assumptions about Jeremiah. A man hated for 40 years because he prophesied this exact catastrophe. A man branded a traitor. This man doesn't say, "I told you so." He doesn't gloat over being right. He weeps. Jeremiah sits among the ruins of the shattered city and writes the book we know as the Lamentations of Jeremiah. And this is not the triumph of someone who was proven right. It is the weeping of someone who loved. Here are his words, some of the most moving in all of world literature. "How lonely sits the city that was once full of people. How like a widow she has become, she that was great among the nations. She weeps bitterly in the night, with tears on her cheeks. Among all her lovers she has none to comfort her." Notice this. Jeremiah does not weep over his own suffering. He weeps over the city that rejected him, over the people who hated him. His heart is broken not by his own pain, but by the pain of the very ones who tormented him. And here is the fourth lesson of resilience, the most paradoxical of all. True strength is the ability to love even those who hurt you. A weak person grows bitter and closes themselves off. A strong person weeps over the pain of others. Jeremiah could have said, "They got what they deserved." Instead, he says, "Streams of tears flow from my eyes because my people are destroyed." Yet here is the most astonishing thing. In the very heart of this lament, in the deepest depths of despair, Jeremiah finds hope. These are perhaps the most famous words from the entire book. Carved on monuments, sung in hymns, whispered in the darkest nights, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases, his mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Consider the context in which these words are spoken. Jeremiah is sitting in the ashes of a destroyed city. His people are in exile. The temple is gone. Everything he loved lies in ruins. And at that very moment, he says, "The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases." This isn't naive optimism. It isn't an escape from reality. It is a faith that passed through the fire and emerged purified. Jeremiah doesn't deny the catastrophe. He looks it dead in the eye, and despite it all, sees what lies beyond. "The Lord is my portion," he says, "therefore I will hope in him." The Lord is good to those whose hope is in him, to the one who seeks him. This is the fifth lesson of resilience, and perhaps the hardest for us to grasp. Resilience is the ability to see hope not instead of pain, but inside it. Not, "Someday everything will be fine," but even now, in this darkness, God is with me. And it is from these very depths that Jeremiah brings forth a prophecy that changed the course of history. When the people were already in Babylonian exile, broken and disheartened, Jeremiah wrote them a letter, and in that letter are words that sound remarkably paradoxical for a man who spent his life prophesying judgment. He advises the exiles not to flee, not to rebel, not to despair. Instead, to build houses, plant gardens, marry, have children, and seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which they were carried into exile. Because, he tells them, if it prospers, you too will prosper. And then comes the promise for which all of this was written. "For I know the plans I have for you," declares the Lord. "Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." To give you hope and a future. These words are like the sun rising after the longest night. They confirm that the judgment Jeremiah prophesied was never the end goal. It was always the pathway to restoration. God does not tear down for the sake of tearing down. He tears down to rebuild. Yet Jeremiah's most profound prophecy was still to come. Here it is, from chapter 31. "The days are coming," declares the Lord, "when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people." This is the first mention of a new covenant in the entire Bible. And it is these exact words that Jesus Christ echoed at the Last Supper when he lifted the cup and said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood." The deepest hope Jeremiah carried through all his suffering was a promise fulfilled 6 centuries later. Now, the most important part. Why does the story of a man who lived 2.5 millennia ago matter to us today? Because Jeremiah is not a distant biblical figure from the past. He is a mirror in which every one of us can recognize ourselves. Who among us hasn't felt what it's like to speak a truth no one wants to hear? Who hasn't felt alone in a crowd? Who hasn't doubted, despaired, or looked up at the sky and asked, "Why all of this?" Who hasn't sat among the ruins of their own plans, thinking everything was over? Jeremiah's story tells us, you are not alone in your pain. The greatest figures in history walked through the exact same valley. And they didn't break, not because they were stronger than us, but because they held on to something greater than themselves. Yet there is an even deeper lesson. Jeremiah reminds us that worldly success is no measure of true greatness. In his lifetime, he was considered a failure. His message seemingly flopped. The people refused to listen. The city fell, and everything he prophesied came to pass in the worst possible way. No happy ending by human standards. And yet, 2,500 years later, we are still talking about him. Meanwhile, the names of the kings who persecuted him and the false prophets who opposed him are long forgotten. Because greatness isn't measured by how many people applauded you during your lifetime. It is measured by what endures after you are gone. Jeremiah left us not a worldly victory, but faithfulness. And faithfulness proved to be far more valuable than victory. Jeremiah's story is about how resilience is born not from raw strength, but from faithfulness. Not from self-righteous certainty, but from surrender to something greater than oneself. Not from the absence of pain, but from the ability to carry your pain and still remain human. He wept, he doubted, he complained. He even wanted to run away from his calling. And that is precisely why he is real. That is why his story gives us not condemnation, but hope. Because if such a broken, vulnerable, doubt-filled person could run his race to the finish, then so can we. Because in the end, resilience is not what we display to the world. It is what we preserve inside when the world turns away. It is the fire burning within us even when, and especially when, everything outside seems like ashes. If this story touched you, if you recognized a piece of yourself in Jeremiah, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring stories that transform us from within. And let us know in the comments, what struck you the most about this prophet's journey? And has there ever been a moment in your life when, like Jeremiah, you kept going despite everything?